Good morning, this is Nick from Nick's Handmade Crochet. Um, I'm going to just do a little tutorial about tension and how you can adjust your tension, make it easier for you to do your stitches, because in the other little tutorials that I've done, I didn't mention that. And, I can see myself moving my hook up and down, and you're probably thinking, what the hell am I doing? So I'm going to try and explain that today. So I'm just going to use this little swatch that I used doing a demonstration the other day about how you join and change in colours. And I'll just continue that. I use UK terminology. So I'm using my 5mm crochet hook, and I'm just going to start with this spot, and I'll use a different color so you can see. And while I'm looking at this, I'm thinking, well, if you had a piece like this, how would you know which is the top, the bottom, the front, the back? So because when you tie off at the end of your yarn, most of the time you're going to have like a little knot, and your beginning chain where you started might have a little knot. So what's the difference? So I know this is my the top of my project and not the where I did the initial chains, because I can clearly see my V's. And if I switch over to the bottom and see, you can see them a little bit, but they're really squashed together and much tighter. So I know that that was where I started and this is where I finished. So to get back onto the topic that I want to talk to you about today, I'm just going to, this is just some scrap yarn, and I'm just going to unravel that to start. My husband kindly rolled that up for me. He's really good at that because it was a bit of a mess. So I'm just going to get some length here, and I'm going to pop that, let that drop down into my basket so I don't have to worry about the ball rolling around in front of me. And I'm going to add this yarn just by making my little slip knot there. You don't have to do it this way, but this is just how I tend to start so that I can have some security. I'm just going to move both those tails across, and I'm going to grab my yarn, I'm going to pull that through and pull that through, and that just secures that there. So as I said, I'm going to just demonstrate on this particular tutorial, and I'm going to talk about tension. So the first row, let's do some single crochet and double crochets on this tutorial. So I've added that there. I'm going to chain one, and for the purposes of this tutorial, I am going to go back into that same stitch, which is different from what I did here. So I'm not going to count that as a stitch. I'm just going to go back into here and do my first single crochet. And if you're pulling too hard here on your working yarn and you think, right, I want to do my next stitch, and you go in, to try and get through can be really tough and tricky, and you think, oh, it's so tight. So that's what I wanted to make a point of, is that you might see me fiddling around doing that in my tutorials. It's because I just want to make sure that I've got enough slack with the yarn on my hook to go into the next stitch. So there's my single crochet, and just fiddle a bit, and just so that you can easily get your hook under the next stitch to bring up, and you're not fighting against it. It's not so tight that you've got no room to move, and then you get to that point and you're trying to get things through, and it's, it makes it incredibly hard. You think, it just looks so easy, and why am I finding it so hard to do? part of that could be the tension. So yeah, give yourself a little bit of wiggle space. You don't want it so loose that this loose here, that when you do your stitch, you're going to end up with uneven tension and big fat weird things like that. And that, if you're getting things like that, it's because you're too loose with your tension. So again, this all takes practice. So do single crochet, just, that's why using the yarn on your hook to sort of help, move things back and forth, just to give yourself a little bit of room, just to pull your hook up a little bit so that you can do the next stitch. So that's why you're sort of using your finger as a guide over here, however you want to use it. I know people do around one finger and then around another one and all that sort of stuff, so to guide. So you just have to work out what you think will work for you, but just having that yarn over my finger, I mean, they sell fancy little rings with a hook on it to use and all that sort of stuff. I mean, you could go down the rabbit hole of finding little accessories for your crochet, but your finger will do to start. Okay, so I'm going to go in. So where's my stitch? Remember, we're talking about a V, which is 2 stitches that look like a V, 2 pieces of yarn, which makes up 1 stitch. I keep on saying 2 stitches, but I actually mean the yarn makes this V. 2 pieces of that yarn makes a stitch. Really have to work on the terminology that I'm using to describe things. So again, this previous row was double crochet, and you don't want to go into any of these spaces. Just want to go directly under that V. There is a little space there because of the size of the hook and the yarn I'm using. It looks bigger. If you're using a smaller hook and say maybe a 4-ply yarn, that won't be as obvious. So that's why I'm using this slightly bigger hook, just so that you can see where your stitch is going. So it's going to go under here and pull through and pull up. So I'm trying to maintain the evenness of my stitches along my work by just letting this yarn slide over my finger. And that's why it's important that you have plenty of yarn, your working yarn, unraveled. And that's why I like using a little basket, lower than my hips, or just on the floor, provided you don't have cats and dogs that are going to come along and play with it and cause you havoc. Just because it allows for your yarn to unravel from the ball and you don't have to worry about that. Okay, under again. So I'll just move this along a bit quicker. So that one felt a bit tight, so I've just pulled up with my hook, pulled that up a little bit, and you'll notice that it gets tighter. If your yarn and your ball, if you're getting too close to the yarn ball, it will start to tighten up because it's not unraveling, and that's sort of an indication to unravel your ball a bit more and just to pull up a little bit, just to make sure that you maintain the same tension per stitch. So I am having to pull a little bit of length there just to loosen that up. Now, when I started this work, I didn't put my stitch markers in which I should have, because I'm always saying use your stitch marker, use your stitch marker. So this first stitch, I know that's where that knot was, the slip knot, and that was my first stitch. Here's a different sort of stitch marker. The reason I like this, and I'm digressing again, the reason I like this stitch marker is because you can clip that closed at the end, and it is a bit fiddly to use, and I really hated that to start, but sometimes these can unravel off, so you've got to make sure that they're facing quite a way down, halfway through there. So I hadn't used a stitch marker, and you can see when you get to the end, it's like, well, was that the last stitch? Where's that stitch? So for the previous tutorial I was using, showing how to change colour and turn, I'd done a chain up for the first stitch, like I'd done the first chain one before we started here. But I know if I switch that around, there is a V here, and they're tricky to get into and tricky to see. So again, that's why I stress stitch markers. So I'm going to go in there. As you can see, it's sort of on its side, and you think, oh, I really wouldn't have been able to see that had I not known, if I didn't have my stitch marker. So I'm going to chain up 3, because this row coming back, I'm going to do a double crochet. So you can do 2 or 3 chains for a double crochet. Depends on who you're watching, the tutorial, the pattern, and that just gives you height. Now, I know that there's some patterns that don't even bother doing any chain up. They'll just go straight into the stitch. But for the purposes of what I'm doing today, I'm going to chain up 3 and turn. I'm not going to count that as my stitch, which in previous tutorials I did count that as a stitch. So I'm going to bring my yarn over. Double crochet is going into that stitch, which is where you chained up from. And there's my V. Bring my yarn through. I'm going to grab my yarn and bring it through 2 loops. So there's 2 loops on the hook, and bring that through. And again, when you're doing something like double crochet where it's even got more height to it, you really don't want to be too tight with your tension, because if I stop myself from letting any of this yarn here, I'm really struggling to get that through. And where am I going to go? Where am I going to go? Like, I'm running out of space and running out of yarn, and it's going to be too tight. And you can see, because it was so tight, it's pulled it up, and it's not evenly on my row. Again, if you have too much yarn, then it'll be loose, and you'll have this really big chain. It won't be the same size. So again, the tension and the amount of yarn, the tension that you put on the yarn here is going to impact the tension of your work and your stitch. Let's try and evenly have So just for an example, because I've chained up and I've gone into the same stitch here, you can see compared to what I did before, it bulges out. And if that's what happens if you go into the same stitch, if you're supposed to be counting this as your first stitch, you've just done an increase, you've added a stitch. But if you do this all the way along, it will be even. You'll have that increase plus the stitch in there. Anyway, I don't want to jibber jab too much because I don't want to confuse you, which I probably already have. So my yarn's just a bit tight. I'm going to just pull that. Just try and maintain an even rhythm, and that's really hard to start because you're so focused on putting the hook through, grabbing it, and then remembering, oh, what was a double crochet? I can't remember. I've got to do that, you know, pull through my yarn through the 2 stitches and then repeat that pattern again. So yeah, there's lots to learn when you're crocheting, but tension and managing the amount of yarn that you've got in distance from your hook is really important. And you will spend a lot of time doing this movement from grabbing and pulling more yarn so that you've got some length. You don't want too much. And again, just practice. So I'm just going to double crochet to the end, and again, if you're new, roll over to see where that V is, see where your stitch is. Because I've changed colours, I can see the blue from the previous row. I'm not going to go into the hole there. I haven't turned my yarn over and I'm not looking at the V, but I know that that's where my hook will go because it's going under the V. And that's the blue from the previous stitch. And it was a single crochet, but it doesn't matter. Single crochet, double crochet, triple crochet, half double crochet, these are all US terms. You're always going to end up with a V. So regardless of the stitch, that was my single crochet row below and I have a V, and this is my double crochet row and I have a V. So if you come to the end there, because I've changed colours and it looks a bit weird, I know that I've still got 2 more stitches to go into. If I hadn't, I'd probably miss that stitch and go in there. I'm going to go in here. And there's my last stitch of the row on my stitch marker, and you can see the knot that I had there. And I do have another little tutorial on changing colours and weaving in your ends that you might like to have a look at if you think, well, that's all really ugly and what am I going to do about that? All right, I hope this quick tutorial helped in regards to tension for your crochet project and how you manage that, and hopefully you'll get some even stitches and your work will look nice and even. Bye for now. Happy crocheting.